that reminder of his traumatic past almost single-handedly caused him to remove Paddock. What's wrong with me? Craddock. Hold on. Goddamn my pen. Craddock. Sorry.
Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO show Westworld. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And this is our Instacast episode where we look back on this week's episode of Westworld and provide our immediate reactions. This week's episode was entitled Riddle of the Sphinx. Big D, what'd you think?
This is one of the episodes that make me hate the Instacast, because I almost feel like we can't do it justice. There's so much going on. And then the fact that I would rather be sitting watching the show again than recording this right now. But it's the type of episode I love that's dense with so much information that you have to sit there and unpack it, and it would take at least a day to really delve into it. So my first impressions, really strong, and I liked what they did.
I completely agree with you. I watched it alone tonight as opposed to usually watching it with at least one or two other people. And I really enjoyed the freedom to actually pause a few times just to gather what the hell it was I just saw. I think about 15 minutes into it, I had to put the captioning on because there was so much in the script. It was so dense. And then also, beside all of that, I thought it was some of the most beautifully shot footage in the series. That scene where Man in Black and Lawrence and the gang are riding into the sunset, absolutely gorgeous overhead shot. The rain scene in Las Mudas was also beautifully shot. The slow motion, the panning from detail to detail. I thought this was some of the most cinematically impressive stuff on the show, and it really drew me in and took me beyond all the wacky tinfoil and just into the heart of the show.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also the show surprised me today, which is important to me. Just when I think I have things figured out and I'm feeling all proud about myself, the show just shits on me and makes me realize, hey, you're not that smart. That first iteration that we see James Delos with William, and he pulls the paper out of his jacket. I'm like, oh, okay, I know what it is. We just viewed the last iteration of the loop where he's got the answers to the question. And I was so happy as the episode went on that I realized, hey, smart guy, you haven't figured out anything. So I like it when the show does that.
Yeah, speaking of figuring things out, the Riddle of the Sphinx, just for people who aren't aware, if you want to kind of piece together your theories based on this, I've got a lot cranking on in my head. It's a tale that Oedipus goes to the Sphinx, and there's a riddle that says, what has 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 at night? And if you get it incorrect, the Sphinx gobbles you up. Oedipus answers correctly, and the answer is man. You're born on 4 legs, or your hands and your knees, basically. Then you stand up in your middle of your life when you're an adult, and then you have a cane at the end. So 4, 2, 3. It's interesting because I'm trying to relate it to the episode, and I'm wondering if the reference is that the Man in Black is an Oedipus figure, or it could be a million other things. But if you're wondering about the title of the episode, that's what it is. And then also the music at the top of the key, of course, was the Rolling Stones, Playing with Fire, very on the nose.
Yeah, and I thought one of the things they did that was a home run was the transformation of William to the Man in Black. Not just letting us see what he had been going through for the last 30 years, but also the physical transformation that each iteration we had watched with the different version of James Delos, you could pick up that there was slight changes in the appearance of William, graying of the hair. And when it finally came that last turn where the Man in Black came in with the stubble, I got goosebumps. I feel weird for saying that the TV could do it, but I was like, yes. So I thought it was great the way that they did it. And they advanced his characters in a lot of ways that I didn't expect.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the interesting things that they did there too is a lot of times when you see a person develop, it doesn't go in the logical arc you would think. Normally in what I would call cheap fiction, or in, really unsophisticated writing, you see the person start young and innocent, and they eventually become old and grizzled and and cynical. And in this, you don't see that exact arc. Instead, you see that wild oscillation of William becoming insanely cruel, and his emotions haven't caught up with his ferocity. And then you see as the Man in Black, where there's almost a sense of resignation, a sense of matter of fact. He's becoming more detached from the emotional aspect of it and much more beguiled with the intellectual part.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I really want to look into between now and the deep dive. The feeling I got, and obviously it's too elementary, is that, we watched William go from white hat to black hat, and are we now watching him go back to white hat? You can see the disappointment in it that he has towards Craddock with the torturing of Lawrence's wife, that there has been a shift in him lately, whether it was the final failure of James, it was being reminded of the suicide of his wife. But I don't think it's as clean as white hat, black hat, back to white. There's some kind of gray in here, but there's definitely a change in the Man in Black that we're seeing.
So we talked a bit about our first impressions. I want to get to what we learned. This episode taught us a lot. It also opened up a bunch of questions. And the first thing, if you ask me what's the big thing you learned from this episode, I think one is that the question that was lingering on everyone's minds after episode 3, who was Grace? Grace pops up at the end of the episode, says, "Hey, Dad." So we now have confirmation the mystery woman is the Man in Black's daughter, Emily.
Yeah, and you have to do this. If the show had continued to ask, because this episode creates 100 new questions and directions. If you don't answer at least a few, it becomes lost. At one point, you start losing, all of the different mysteries and the tales, and it just spirals out of control. So I was very happy as a viewer to really have a lot of answers to some of the questions that aren't that important. So the good one was, Grace's Emily, but it's also nice now we know that Ghost Nation was not reprogrammed by Elsie as some protectors of the human members who are in the park. They could be protecting them still because we haven't seen violence, but it's not Elsie because she's been, chained up, living on protein bars and ketchup packets, but it wasn't her who reprogrammed it. So there's another answer.
Right, and we did find out also who seems to be in charge of Ghost Nation. They take the prisoners to Akacheta, who is now dressed up in a full Ghost Nation war paint, and they refer to him as the first of our kind. He seems to be the one either passing judgment or deciding what to do with the human prisoners that are taken. Also, I think it's safe to say that anybody who is in the scene being claimed up by Ghost Nation, we can assume is human because it's said in that scene expressly that Grace has observed that they don't, and Stubbs has observed that they don't take violent action toward humans, but they will kill hosts.
Yeah, and even though we've decided that they didn't reprogram Ghost Nation as a whole, all you would need to do was, from these scenes, learn to influence Akacheta or to have Akacheta switch and have his mission or his narrative change in order to have them become protectors. So there's still an element of that in play, but it's now a question of who is it that's behind it.
Now let's talk about the other huge reveal. And, we both had ideas of what Delos was up to. It seems now your suspicions are confirmed, Big D, that it seems like it's an Eternal Life project.
Yeah, and it was good to see that now a lot of the tinfoil can be taken off. Have they been replacing people and putting them back in the real world? It's clear that was one of the goals of the park when it was founded. But the Eternal Life Project has thankfully failed with the decommissioning of, I think it's the 149th iteration of James Delos. But the Man in Black has finally come to the point where he's questioning the entire purpose of the project as well as just whether to continue it. So we can assume, right, at this point, it has failed and they haven't successfully replaced anyone?
I don't think that's a safe assumption, and here's why, is that we see that the work has been continued in that lab. That lab seems dedicated to the project. In addition, we see that the Man in Black seems to be at odds with the board, and this might be the board's decision to continue with it, with the project. We don't know when the Man in Black last saw Jim Delos. This could be before he even went back into the park. This could be, years ago. And so I think that it's the safe way to think about it is that yes, it failed, but it could be that that they've gotten closer. You know, as he said, they were only a year or two away, as he guessed. Yeah.
Well, there is one key that they tell us at the end of that we see is as Bernard and Elsie are entering the shattered, his containment unit, the display on the entrance says 149th cycle. So we know that this is still the host that William had, or Man in Black had the conversation that he said, just leave him in there, let him continue to kind of go off and see what happens. So this isn't iteration number 160, 175, but in like 20 years, they only pushed it from 7 days until 35 days until they had that cognitive plateau. So I don't think they've progressed any further than we've seen so far. But again, with this show, you can never tell.
So I'm glad you mentioned the cognitive plateau. So if you were watching the scenes and they were a little confusing, basically what's going on in a nutshell is that they keep creating new Jim Deloses, running them through a cycle. And what they're trying to do is get a fidelity gauge based on the interview that William's having with him to see if he can behave as a normal human. And not only that, but have the exact same conversation, right? So basically you're getting as close to the real person as possible, and you want perfection before you consider it done. At the end, the Man in Black seems to look at the whole situation and go, the question isn't even can we do it, much like Jurassic Park, but should we? What's the point of having you alive?
Yeah, what I think is interesting is the host seems to continue, or let's call it the hybrid, because they mentioned that the code that runs the human host hybrid is completely different. So the hybrid seems to run completely fine on his own until you interject a sense of reality. When you make the cloned version of James Delos aware that he is the clone, that's when immediately the tics and the process starts to degrade and break down. So theoretically, if you had James Delos and he never became aware that he was the cloned version of himself, I wonder how long he would have continued. But the reality is what causes him to crash.
And you mentioned the host code and the human replicant code was very different. That hybrid code is very different. One thing that's important, though, is when Bernard looks at that code with Elsie, he does note that it's very similar to what he saw when he was hacking into Abernathy. So it lends the question of that code seems to be what they're trying to smuggle out. It's kind of the smoking gun there. It's not that they're trying to smuggle any other data out of Delos, but rather they really, really want, this is the IP it seems that they're looking for.
Yeah, and we learned also that Bernard, through his flashbacks, that one of the problems he's having, because he's leaking all of the cortical fluid leak when he's shot in the head, is now we know it was set back to, because Elsie identifies that it was the gunshot wound to his head that had caused it, so it wasn't the shovel. But two neat things we learned is that besides being able to set the mortality response of a host, you also have something called ignore physical damage. So if a host is physically damaged, they can completely ignore all the safety protocols and continue going forward. So we have something in there called safe mode. So I imagine if he's Windows based, you do that just by like tapping the F8 key. How do you get these hosts in safe mode?
Yeah, his background wallpaper won't be exactly the same, but for the most part, he'll be Bernard.
A slower version of Bernard without networking.
Another big Bernard reveal is that he can control the drone host. We see that at least in his memory, he saw that he was responsible for the massacre in the lab, apparently while he was trying to sneak out a control unit. And he kind of whispers to the drone hosts, who then go haywire and start killing all the scientists.
Yeah, and Bernard also was responsible for all the bloodshed that we see within, I think, was it, what they call it? It was Sector 22, but it was Secret Bunker number 12. So he's the one who killed everybody there. And Elsie says, listen, I'm willing to go with you on this. I'll forgive you. Bernard asks for forgiveness and give me a chance. And her one request, don't lie to me and don't hurt me. And he breaks that within like 2 seconds. We see him have the recollection that he did it, and he remains quiet. I don't think it would be smart for Elsie or any of us to trust Bernard at all.
Another key fact we discovered was the fate of Logan. The Man in Black tells Jim Delos that Logan overdosed on drugs, that Juliet, of course, his daughter, Jim Delos' daughter, killed herself, and that William, in a flashback scene we see, is the one who found her body. It looks like it was suicide in the bathtub.
Yeah, we'd heard before mentioned that there was some pills and that it was insinuated that she drowned in the tub. But you can see the mix of the water and blood, much like the flashback we see with Bernard and the white milky matter and the blood of the text. But one last thing I want to address with Bernard, I was questioning whether he's reliable, whether he has some ulterior motives. Elsie identifies a defect in him, that his memories are not addressed, which means they don't have an anchor. So there's no way that even Bernard himself seems to be able to tell which of his memories are falling in sequence. So I'm leaning more towards it's not that he has some kind of a sinister intent for Elsie, but it's actually just caused by the defect that he's having, that his memories are out of his control, and to us as viewers are even just useless. Right.
To make that clear, the way a computer works is a memory has a physical address, and that's a code. And so the CPU, the processing unit, can use that code to access the memory. So if you didn't have an addressed memory, you just have a piece of data in there, but the control unit would not know where that memory fits in or what it means exactly. And that's what's going on with Bernard.
But what kind of fucking pants are Bernard wearing? Clementine dragged him at least 3 miles over rocky terrain on his ass, and there's only one tiny hole?
Well, this is clearly evidence that they're on an island off the coast of mainland China where the sand is very soft. It actually just won't even tear through your pants. It's basically like powdered sugar.
He's got to be wearing some heavy duty like Carhartt, those work pants that construction guys wear. But the last thing I learned, and I think maybe we'll go on to some questions that we have to ponder, is we finally have some kind of a description of the process of creating a host and some of the terminology. So they describe the process of creating a hybrid is you print the body, you copy the developed mind, which is the terminology they're using for the human being's consciousness or whatever who they are essentially is the developed mind, and then onto a control unit, which are the little balls that we see them using the 3D printing. And that the host CPUs, those control units, are created by 3D printers.
Right, and a key fact that goes along with that, as you mentioned before, the cognitive plateau. They're saying it's not so much that the mind is rejecting the body that it's in, but rather that the mind is rejecting reality and rejecting itself, which is something a typical organ does not do. Right, if you transplant a heart, the heart may physically, the body may reject it, but it's not the heart rejecting itself. On its own, it's fine. So it seems to be. Again, lend more credence to the idea that the mind may never get past that hurdle, and you might just hit a wall there. Another point, though, is we've asked several times now why it is that Delos would be doing the work that it's doing, and why they would have a theme park, why any of this exists. And I think it's a really important point here. You could never do the kind of research they're doing with Jim Delos on these iterations in the public eye, right? You just can't do it. And so they may be gathering data on a large scale, but the actual testing has got to be done on a very small, very secretive scale.
Yeah, hell, you can't be doing this. This is like when people are doing animal testing. Imagine if it got out, if they're doing it in the mainland, some testing on human clones and just discarding them, just the protest, you wouldn't be able to do this. So you almost needed the park as a shield just to run these. So even though you're gaining some other data and some other advancements, this might be just a shield for what they were really doing.
All right, let's get on to the questions that we got to ponder before the deep dive that's coming out Tuesday. If anybody can help us with these, please write in, host at shatontv.com, or hit us up on Twitter. The first one I had is the most obvious. Ford had Bernard print a control unit for another human, and we don't know who. The way he said it to Elsie made me think that immediately it'd be Elsie, but I don't know if that's a misdirection. And also, she seems like a pretty small player for Ford to be that concerned with.
Yeah, and Elsie, there was a moment where Bernard comes and unchains her, and she realizes that he's a host. And she said, "How can that be? You went back. You were cycled off of the park. You went home. You have a wife. You have a child. And she started to almost question herself, whether the backstory that Bernard had been given was the backstory that she had also. I think it's too obvious that it's her, and without the ability to address or index the memories, he could have printed this who knows how long ago. Did the bloodshed start immediately after? Did we see the sequence that he pockets the control unit, then goes immediately and kills the first tech, or were those two different scenes?
Yeah, it looked like it was the same scene. He pockets it, he's starting to walk out, and then he whispers to looks like he's making a break for it. And again, the thing is with the secret lab, if you die in a secret lab, no one's going to know about it. But an interesting thing to consider with that, though, is we've seen before that Bernard can have memories implanted in his head by Ford, and you never know what's real and what's not. And we've said multiple times on this season that Bernard is not a reliable narrator. So the fact is, even when he's in the room with Elsie, he's like, I'm not really here with you, am I? Or you're not really here with me. The fact that Bernard is this mixed up could mean that none of this even happened in the sequence that he remembers. And he could just be being laced with that blame to drive on the narrative that he's been saddled with this time.
Yeah, I think another big question to go into the deep dive, and I'm already wanting to go back and watch the episode again, is the advice that the man in black gets from Lawrence's daughter about the direction that he's going in the game. She said, if you're looking forward, you're looking in the wrong direction. So for me, obviously, you're looking back would be in time, but it could also be in a physical location. Am I looking too much into it, or is she just telling him, hey, it's not what's in front of you, it's what you've done in the past? Or is she talking about you need to go in a place from your past?
Well, one of the interesting things is the first bit of information that the man in black gets is from young Robert Ford, young Ford bot. I don't know what we want to call him, Bob bot. Bobby bot. And he says, basically that it starts where you end and ends where you began. And so now we get in this, if you pair that with, if you're looking forward, you're looking in the wrong direction, it seems like he really needs to look at his genesis and for clues. But I'm with you, Big D. I'll be the first to admit I'm baffled by this one.
No, but I think tie this in now with what you said, the mystery of the Sphinx is. Is he talking about your birth? That the beginning isn't in the park, it's your birth. It's what starts out on 4 legs, 2 legs, 3 legs. Is he talking about look back at your birth?
I mean, that's pretty far back.
I know, but I'm talking about not about the origin. Hey, look back at your creation. That it's not just what he's done in the park or his 30 years of experiences and narratives. That it's possibly to question his own creation. I don't want to start and switch over to, hey, Man in Black William is a host, and at some point he had been switched out. But the title and the direction from Lawrence's daughter could go that way.
Woo! Well, another mystery phrase to ponder is Akcheta says to Stubbs in his eerie whispers, "You live only as long as the last person to remember you." Now, obviously, this is a wonderful sentiment, and it's a great way to in many cultures that believe that your death is not your death. It's when you cease to be remembered as your death. I know in my family, on the anniversary of any family member's birthday, we go to their grave and we pay our respects. And so that person is always remembered going back generations, and you're never alone. Your grave will always be visited. But what does it mean in the context of the show? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's very Disney's Coco to me. Your physical body may die, but your spiritual being doesn't until you're forgotten. So I'm sure we'll get a lot of emails in pointing us in the right direction. But for me, I'm looking the most forward to going back and trying to dissect what are they telling us about the Man in Black shift. It's not clear as white, black, white. There's something else that happened in his timeline. We've seen him make changes before. And in season 1, we questioned how could he go black hat so quick? In this one, it's how could he go white hat so quick? Was it just the reference of Lawrence to you had a wife once, you had a daughter, which kind of on its own reminded me of Ford reminding Bernard of a cornerstone? That reminder of the Man in Black's almost cornerstone traumatic event single-handedly led him to kill Craddock and free Lawrence's family. So I'll be interested to go back and try to dissect that and look at what they're trying to tell us. But there's got to be some information in there upon second viewing, I'll find.
One more question I had, and hopefully you can help me with this, is the Man in Black, when they come to the railroad scene, which, by the way, super gross, super insane. I think it's a commentary on what happens to the hosts once they're not given direction anymore. They just kind of, they can't figure things out, so they start using human beings as railroad ties. And but the Man in Black says the railroad has changed direction. It's not the way it normally goes. And in that conversation with Lawrence, he says that Ford has designed the game for multiple contenders, which made me start thinking, like, is this a race that Ford has established for the future of Westworld? And, you know, the winner is the most fit to guide the future of the hosts and humans.
So it's Willy Wonka. So we're gonna see somebody fall into the chocolate river, and we're gonna watch Veruca Salt try to get the golden egg. It very well could be that he couldn't make a decision on who was best to advance the hosts as a race or their future. So you create 3 or 4 different variables. You have Maeve, who's guiding herself by love of a fictional daughter. You have Dolores, who's doing it on vengeance and trying to give reckoning to the humans. Maybe William represents a third option.
Yeah, and QA might be another. You know, an interesting thing too with Maeve that I've been thinking about is we keep assuming that Maeve is going after her daughter out of love and that it's some silly fantasy that she has. And Maeve seems a little too smart for that. And then I started thinking about the fact that she always has to have, for some reason, Sizemore is critical to her. And then I thought, oh shit, what if the daughter represents something much more? Like, Maeve understands the daughter will unlock something in her or give her an additional ability or change something about the course of events. And Sizemore is needed there to manipulate either the code or the personality of that host. It seems like I'm expecting when Maeve gets there, if she does find her daughter, in fact, that it's much more than just a reunion between mother and daughter.
But shit, this is almost the worst at this episode, which will, you know, require tons of rewatch and research, that tomorrow we have a big event for Shat on TV and Westworld.
Yeah, as we digest this monstrously complex episode, we also have to schedule in some time to speak with a hugely important cast member for this season, and we'll share that interview later this week. So we got a really jam-packed Monday, but I'm sure the deep dive is going to be one quality whiz banger of an episode.
And I think, is Roger going to be back for that one? He's is he in South Carolina for a wedding?
He's in South Carolina for a wedding. He's coming back to pick up his little rats from my house tonight. He asked me, he said, how are the dogs? Have they been behaving themselves? I said, yeah. Oh, one of them won't stop barking at me. He says, oh, she just wants attention. And I said, the other one just keeps licking his dick. And he says, he only does that around you. So that's been my life for 3 days.
Yeah, I think Raj is the only adult man who has like the Paris Hilton type little tiny rat dogs. I've never met anyone like him before. He dresses them up for the holidays. They have names like, is it Albie Pippington, Bark? What the fuck are their full names?
Albert Wolvington von Berkshire IV, I believe.
And the other one?
I think it's Pippa Middleton von Berkshire.
Yeah, so that's your third host, Roger Roper, a man who dresses his dogs and gives them 5 names. But he should be back here for the deep dive, and hopefully tomorrow, if the schedules work out. I've been wanting to hear from this cast member for quite a while, and maybe we can get some information out of them.
All right, that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Instacast. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. Facebook, search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatontv.com. If you've got any ideas about what we talked about in this Instacast, please email us at host@shatontv.com. We'll use those to drive the deep dive. And in addition, we'll read some of the best on Thursday's Telegraph. And they all appear on the website, shatontv.com. If you have a minute, visit our advertiser survey at survey.libsyn.com/shatontv. If you could just answer a couple questions about yourself, it'll help us get some sponsorships based on the stuff that you, the audience, like. So that'd be great. You don't want to hear ads that you hate. So, go in there and tell us about yourself. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. So be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please be sure to leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. Also, You can check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, at shatthemovies.com, or subscribe to Shat the Movies, where we review 80s and 90s movies that you, the audience, votes on. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert, Roger Roper, and Carrie Gross, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us on Tuesday for the Westworld Deep Dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the Mesa.